A lot of people usually share their story after they've had a kid and they're like, oh, it's great and it worked out and 5 years later I was successful. But that's not always true. And I think the few people who've come out and said I tried and it didn't work, those stories made me feel not alone.
We've shared a lot of success stories on this podcast over the years, and those are important. Infertility is a challenge, but many people do overcome it, either on their own or with the help of fertility treatments like IUI or IVF. But we know that everyone who sets off on this path doesn't always reach their goal. So we think it's important to share some of those stories as well. And that's what we're doing today. Today's guest, Justine Galloway, is going to share her experiences with loss, IVF, and ultimately resolve in her decision to stop trying to conceive. I'm Dan Bulger with Progyny, and this is Infertility.
Hi, my name is Justine Galloway. I'm an engineer at Illumina, and I'm happy to be here today. I've been a runner my whole life. I was a collegiate runner, so I ran for Rutgers, and then I ran marathons in my 20s, and then I was diagnosed with something called focal dystonia. And in the Parkinson's family, golfer's yips is another example of it. And so I wasn't able to run forward for long distances. It's like the neural pathway from your brain to your leg gets kind of messed up. And so I started falling. After 2 years of trying to get a diagnosis, getting MRIs of every single part of my body and being told everything from MS to see a psychologist, I was diagnosed with something called focal dystonia or runner's dystonia. So if I run backwards, it messes up my brain doesn't catch on. So I've ran 2 half marathons backwards and I got a Guinness World Record, which has recently been broken. I think I've actually ran 5 or 6 half marathons backwards, but 2 of them were Guinness World Records. And then I ran New York City Marathon backwards.
Most of us, myself included, can't imagine finishing a marathon, so the fact that she started running and finishing marathons backwards is pretty remarkable. It demonstrates who we're dealing with here. Justine Galloway is not someone who shies away from a challenge. Justine was 38 when she got married, so they knew that time wasn't necessarily on their side when they started trying to conceive.
We actually were pretty fortunate. I got pregnant in April. So April, I was pregnant and I was very excited. I still remember not being able to eat sushi on my birthday, but that was okay. And I felt amazing. Like I ran, everything was great. I actually felt better than I've ever felt. I was surprised. And then on the day before Mother's Day, I started spotting. I, at that point, called the doctor and they told me to come in. And I went into the hospital and realized, they informed me that I was having a miscarriage. And so it was a bit upsetting because I don't think I realized how common it was. And I was pretty mad at myself thinking it was something I did, like running or something else. The nurse kind of informed me that there's nothing I did and made me feel very good about it because, she said people who have I know this sounds horrible, but people who are on drugs can still have babies. Like there's nothing you could have done to make it, to make it a non-viable pregnancy. The next day, Mother's Day, I could barely walk. And when I started telling my initial story, everyone's like, well, I found out how common a first miscarriage was. So I kind of thought that would be the end of my miscarriages. Unfortunately, it was not. We actually got pregnant again in September that same year. Somewhere around there, I had my second miscarriage. That's when I started seeking a bit more help on it. We got pregnant once again. We had our third miscarriage in February. I realized that I couldn't do this and there was something wrong. I hadn't had any of them tested and I started to want to figure out the IVF journey. I wish I had known more and done something earlier in my life to either freeze my eggs or something like that. But yeah, I don't think I realized how difficult it would be. I started IVF. We did the shots, which I had no idea. Like I didn't understand how difficult it was for all the shots. And I, every day putting a shot in my stomach was extremely difficult and multiple shots. I'm fortunate that I had my partner help me out a lot of the times because as it got worse, the bruises got worse. And, I still have one little heart we joke around with that's still there. so I went through my first cycle and they extracted somewhere around 20 eggs, which is amazing for IVF. And they were able to fertilize somewhere around 16 embryos. And I had no idea this was part of it either. And then, several of them did not get to blastocytes. And then the 2 or 3 that did, most of them were non-viable. 1 or 2 was low mosaic. And we did that, I think, 3 times, and we got the same results every time.
The likelihood of creating chromosomally abnormal embryos increases with age. Those first few cycles Justine did without the support of Progyny, and for the next cycles her employer offered the Progyny benefit, so she was much better supported moving forward.
And then I started with Progyny and reached out to a different fertility doctor and started that path. And then I got pregnant, not from IVF, in 2022. And that was March of 2022. And I thought that was it. I'm like, this is a sign, because we weren't getting pregnant before. And so I thought that was a sign. It actually had a heartbeat. I think it went past the other ones. The heartbeat, I got told, was low, and it was very unlikely that it was going to survive. I actually had a work trip planned to France. And the doctor gave me a few options, and they said, you can have a DNF because we're pretty confident it's not viable. You can take your chance and go to France or wait. And since I'd been through 3 miscarriages, they can't do anything when you have a miscarriage, especially that early. So I went to France and I, enjoyed Paris, and then I had a miscarriage. We went through 1 more round of IVF. And so my experience with Progyny was a lot better. I had a really great experience with the doctor, but had similar outcomes. I think we did maybe 2 cycles with the Progyny doctor. One of them, it looked really promising. We similar 16 embryos, but there were 7 that made it all the way to blastocysts. And some of them were graded actually really well. And then unfortunately there was a mistake at the lab, and they didn't get the genetic testing from the 2 that looked very good. And when I spoke with the doctor, he said it's if we unfreeze and retest, then there's a chance that will make them unviable. And so at that point, we decided to do an implant. And so we did the first implant, and it didn't take, and we just did 1 embryo. And that was based on the recommendation from the doctor. And then we did the second implant, and we did 2 embryos, the ones without the chromosomal data. But they looked really great. 1 took. The heart rate was excellent, amazing. Everything looked really good. I graduated from the fertility clinic. They gave me a onesie. And then my husband and I went to Mexico for a week. I had stopped running, thinking maybe if I just did nothing, it would happen. We came back, and I went in for a normal checkup at the regular doctor, because I had graduated from the fertility clinic. And unfortunately, I know that when the nurse does the ultrasound and they give you that look, and then they get the doctor in. And initially when she said, I said I was nervous, and she's like, it'll be fine. Your heart rate was great before. It should be great. And then it turned, and that one we had a DNF, and we tested it, and it was low mosaic. And so, chromosomally abnormal. And, you also get the genetic makeup of the sex. So it was a girl. It would have been a girl. And it was, it wasn't viable. And that's kind of when I decided I had to stop, just for my own health and well-being, because it had been 5 years of our first 5 years of our marriage had been spent trying to have a child. Part of me felt like I was giving up, because I don't give up. So it took a while, but going through IVF, your body isn't your body. Like there's so many shots. It was a lot. And then the shots when you actually go to implant the embryo are almost more difficult than the shots before. So, it took a little bit, and, we booked a trip to New Zealand last year. And I think that helped me because it was like, I think if you have kids, like yes, you still vacation, you still do a lot of fun things, but that's been our focus for so long that we didn't focus on anything else. And so it was nice to kind of start focusing on what else our lives could be like without children.
Now, there are other paths to parenthood, but as we've said in our show numerous times, every person's path is different. And for Justine, those other options aren't the path that she's choosing.
I think everyone's journey is different, and I think everyone's decision is different. It just wasn't the right time for us to figure out another option. I think we went through so much that we just needed to be okay with our path. My husband started working at a school and has helped sometimes with their coaching, their team. And so I think there's other ways we can find. I think it's important that people normalize it, but then there's also, it's not just my story, right? So my partner's a little different on how he shares the story, and he's a little more, doesn't like talking about it as much. So I totally respect that. But it's hard because I feel the need to share and he doesn't, and trying to find that balance and respect his beliefs, but also respect mine. I mean, I think it's hard. I think I go to baby showers now or a 1-year-old, my friend brings over a 1-year-old and I'm like, oh, I would have had a 1-year-old or a 4-year-old. So it never goes away. And there's part of me that wishes I would have continued. But I think it's also okay not to. Like whatever your decision is, you can make that decision and you shouldn't feel bad about that decision. Because I think we've been put in this place where you have to have a child. You don't have to have a child. You can live a life without a child. Your family planning can be you and your partner, and you can have an amazing family. Or it can be you. Like, you don't need to fit into a box. And it would be great, but it's also okay not to have that. That doesn't define who you are. And I think whatever decision you make, finding the way to be okay with it, which I still struggle to this day to figure out how I'm okay with what my path led to. But you're not alone. I'm sure there are a lot more people out there who've went through what I've gone through and don't have a child at the end of the day. It's just not talked about as much.
Well said. On this show, we really aim to help educate people about what infertility is really like. We do this to help people understand their options, know what to expect along the way, and to know that they are truly not alone. But sometimes hearing from someone who chose a different path can be just as helpful. Feeling pressure to have a baby will not help you do so. So we think it's just incredibly impactful for Justine to share her story with all of us. And with that, I want to thank Justine for doing just that, for sharing her story with us today. And I want to thank you for listening. If you want to connect with us, you can do so on Instagram at This Is Infertility Podcast. If you want to connect with Progyny, you can do that at Progyny Inc. This Is Infertility is brought to you by Progyny. Please remember this podcast is not intended to substitute for the personalized expert advice of your physician. I'm Dan Bulger, and this is Infertility.